Woo, it is time for your Zomia ONE Underground Q&A for the week. And what a week it has been. Of course, really Star Wars filled as far as a week goes. Got a lot of great response from the episode of TIE Fighter Renegades where my man Rob and I both reviewed Rise of Skywalker and got some things to say on that. But, real quick, actually, so Ellen, you went and saw this with me. I mean, what did you think of Rise of Skywalker? Did you like it?
It had its ups and downs.
Its ups and downs?
Yeah, overall it's entertaining.
Best part of the movie? Would it be that little guy?
The little guy, yeah.
Babu Frick?
Babu Frick.
Okay.
Little cute little monkey.
But I mean, you liked it. It had its moments, right? That was...
Sure, I mean, there are a lot of good ideas. I think you mentioned that, too, in your show with Rob, but just too fast.
Too fast.
Way too fast.
Yeah. No, that movie was at a blazing pace. I mean, just full throttle, like right from the beginning. You're right. Yeah. Well, anyway, okay. But there you go, folks. You have Ellen's take on Rise of Skywalker. A quick take on it, but yeah, that was a good time. A little RPX action. I mean, that was nice. Anyway, speaking of like a lot of those details, we talked about this when Rob and I did the review, where I mentioned the visual dictionary. Now, at the time, I had only read through it for about an hour. Now, I'm a very fast reader, also a fast listener. I have dug deeper into the book, and there's a lot of things here, I mean, that bolster a lot of what Rob and I had said, actually including my point that basically they just copied Dark Empire, which, again, I'm okay with that, frankly. But, like, there's a point where there's these red... You have the Sith troopers, right? But then around that... Unfortunately, we didn't bring this part up. But, like, the Emperor having that Sith throne felt very Game of Thrones. And I'm so fucking annoyed by Hollywood thinking they have to constantly copy Game of Thrones. I mean, and not that Star Wars is the only one. Frankly, Star Trek Discovery has done it. I've talked about that since Discovery first came out. It's so bad. But the troopers, they had like the capes. They didn't really look like the Royal Guard that you remember from Return of the Jedi. But the Sith troopers, the red guys that had the capes that were around the Emperor on Exegol, they're actually called Sovereign Protectors, which that is directly lifted. Unquestionably, because I don't think they were ever really used again. That is directly lifted from Dark Empire. So there's no doubt that they were copying that. I mean, the story group knows this stuff better than anybody, and not to say J.J. Abrams had any, or even now probably has any clue what the fuck a Sovereign Protector is. But I thought that, when I read that in the book, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. But this is really, to understand so much, I just want to bring this up because I don't know if we'll get to it. We might talk about it on the next TIE Fighter Renegades that Rob and I do. But so much of what happens in the film is far more deeply explained in the visual dictionary. And actually, really, if you wanted a book that allows you to understand the entire sequel trilogy of Star Wars, that's your book, the visual dictionary for Rise of Skywalker, because it does cover things that have been talked about, and it actually even gives more secrets. Even though I've gotten every visual dictionary and cross-section book and encyclopedia that has come out since Disney took over, pretty much. There might be a book here or there where I looked at it and I go, well, this isn't really encyclopedic. I want the technical manuals and the encyclopedic, right? But I might not have picked them up. But by and large, I have them all. And even, I've amazingly, Disney's only owned Star Wars since 2013. But even within that tenure, they have released multiple editions of certain books, like Ultimate Star Wars. There have been 2 or 3 of those since Disney took over. I have all of them. But, even though I've picked up all the visual dictionaries for every movie, there's still new stuff that applies to Last Jedi and Force Awakens that's in the Rise of Skywalker visual dictionary. So if you ever wanted something somewhat encyclopedic, you want to grab this. In fact, something that was almost insulting when I was reading through it, and I feel like it's almost insulting. So you got to understand, I have been into technical manuals. Okay, now, I don't know if this is just how my head works or what, because I'm as much into technical manuals, for real world technology as I am for fictional, right? So in the 90s, you had this big deal. Del Rey Books was coming out with what they called these essential guides for Star Wars, where they would be these, very, very technical manuals. And Del Rey, of course, is also publishing all of the old expanded universe stuff that's not canon anymore, but still a lot of it was still great. Star Wars material. They were putting all of that out there back then. And they came up with a system of dating the events that occur within Star Wars. And what they had, it was called ABY and BBY. BBY stood for Before the Battle of Yavin, which of course is what happens in episode 4, right? At the time, this is even before the prequels were a thing. This is, the biggest event. The destruction of the Death Star is the biggest event in Star Wars history. So it's a fine thing to choose. And then ABY would be after the Battle of Yavin. For example, Empire Strikes Back would take place 3 ABY, 3 years after episode 4, and it's, 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. Return of the Jedi would take place at 4 ABY, which was a year later. Now, and then you can get into, like, episode 3, I think, is 19 BBY, right? 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, and so on. In the beginning of this book, it gives you almost a full timeline of the cinematic history of Star Wars. But instead of using BBY and ABY, it actually uses what it calls BSI and ASI, which is the same concept, but it's before the Starkiller incident and after the Starkiller incident. And they even mention the Mandalorian, I think, here. And, it basically says, 66 BSI is right around when episode 1 took place. And then 1 ASI, as in after the Starkiller incident, is when Rise of Skywalker takes place. So this is a great book if you're into the sequel trilogy, or you still have your passion for Star Wars intact, and I don't blame you if you don't. But if you do, this is the book to own. If you wanted to get into like some kind of encyclopedic text around Star Wars, this is your one, especially because, again, it does cover a lot of history. And the Sith stuff in this that's what gets me going. That's the stuff I love to read about. I remember back when, this is after West End Games, when Wizards of the Coast, this would have been around when episode 1 came out, so 99, when they took over the Star Wars role-playing game, the tabletop, and they switched from D6 to D20. One of the first books they came out with was the Dark Side source book, I think they called it. Man, I read that book cover to cover over and over again. It talked about the Sith, talked about Marco Ragnos, and everything, Sith holocrons and all the shit. Oh, it's so solid. A lot of good Sith stuff in this book. A lot of philosophy, which is important to get into somewhere, because, I gotta say this, and I think I mentioned it. Rob and I, we had a little bit of conversation off air beforehand, because we were just so excited to talk about, to geek out as we do, get sweaty, about Star Wars. And so there's some things I feel like maybe that didn't get into the audio that we recorded and that we had said before. But and the point I want to bring up with that is that now, as to where I felt the one thing that Rise of Skywalker did do right is that now it explains really what the First Order is, what the idea was, as to where before it was just okay, this is just a simple villain. Now that you attach it to this massive Sith history, not just the Emperor, not just Palpatine, but this long 1,000 years, Sith history, now it suddenly becomes like a menace and something you understand, and, and something that has a place and that has meaning behind it. And so I'm actually kind of excited to watch the sequel trilogy again, just so that I can appreciate the First Order for what it really is, instead of it just being some mysterious kind of seemingly pointless, a villainous organization. within Star Wars. So, I dig that. But anyway, frankly, I wouldn't have even really known that. I mean, the movie kind of gives you that, but you get so much more, again, when you get into this book with the visual dictionary. So check that out if you haven't yet. But we're not here to talk Star Wars. We are here to talk Star Wars. We're here to talk about whatever. Anything that happens on Zomia ONE, and Star Wars is, frankly, a big part of Zomia ONE, because TIE Fighter Renegades is a fairly popular show on the network as a whole and otherwise. But let's get into our questions for this week, and we're going to see, I got a few good ones. I think 3 or 4 really great ones. We'll try and get into a couple of them anyway, and from a great listener, and I want to deep dive on these, so I want to get into them. But quick before we do, look, if you have any kind of review, any thoughts on Rise of Skywalker, I know I have some listeners already that told me they hated it. And I totally understand where you're coming from. Because, it is just like Ellen was just saying, it's a mess of a fucking film. And it just goes at this breakneck speed that I don't think we're used to even in Star Wars. It was very, very odd as far as that goes. So I get it. But I'd love to hear from you. And I will gladly read your reviews on the next episode of TIE Fighter Renegades, or if you want, I can get to them on a Zomia ONE Underground Q&A if you want. But anyway, let's get into some of these questions here. We'll open this baby up with one that could end up getting fairly technical, but I think it's an important question and a great question. And it's one of these subjects that I say often, you need to revisit every once in a while. Like, we're going to go over, something that I get asked about a lot is, okay, what VPN do I use? You have no idea how often I get that question. And I don't mind fielding it once or twice a year, just in case there needs to be an update. Well, guess what? Right now, there needs to be an update, because I am very intrigued by WireGuard, which is a protocol like OpenVPN. It's not actually a VPN service. It's a full-on protocol that operates at the OS level or at the kernel level within Linux. And it can work in other operating systems too, but that's something I need to do my own research on. And actually I'm intrigued to hear from some others about their research on it. So the VPN question is going to come up again. And I get asked it a lot, but another question that I get a lot is, okay, what operating system do I use? And this question has really picked up in the past year, because people are really fucking sick of Windows 10. They're sick of Apple not giving a shit about Macs. Not really, And I get that. I've had listeners email me and say that I can't believe how many... Now, I used to be a Google fanboy back when they were, the Do No Evil company. That changed. Or maybe it just came to light. It didn't really change. But I used to be very supportive of Chromebooks. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. Everybody rock a Chromebook, because most of you are just on the internet doing whatever you're doing on social media anyway, so who gives a shit? And I've gotten, and my opinion on that changed, but I hear from a lot of listeners that, oh no, we're using Chromebooks now. We're using Chrome OS. And I kind of get where you're coming from, and there's a conversation. There is a conversation. I don't think I'm going to get into it here. Isis Lovecraft, she speaking of, on Twitter, she a cybersecurity specialist. I follow her. She made a statement. Basically, she was sharing this really, really crazy exploit. And this is just a few days ago. And she just responded to it with, computers were a mistake. And I was just like, when you are a cybersecurity specialist, or a security researcher or whatever, and on a long enough timeline, these thoughts can't help but seep in. That, holy shit, we got it all goddamn wrong. This is all wrong. It's all fucked up. And I'm certainly on a certain plateau of that right now, where everything, you want to light a fire to everything. You're so fucking sick of it. and you know how deep the problems are, right? Kernel level, coding language level, whatever. And you just get tired of it. And you kind of want to be like, yeah, you know what? I just want to go through the world without one of these fucking things. And I mean a computing device of whatever, manufacturer. Smartphone, laptop, desktop, you take your pick. I mean, you get to that point. When you're a security, I know I'm not the only one. Don't think I'm the only guy that somehow, because I certainly have plenty of people email with this, calling me a Luddite and all this other horseshit. No. But I guarantee you talk to a lot of cybersecurity specialists and security researchers, and they're about to the point where they're just like, fuck it all. Because, you can't give up, I shouldn't say that, you can. You don't want to give up, but at the same time, it's just, you just feel so browbeaten about it, and you just want to go through life. I have days where I just feel like going through life living out of a gym bag or something. You know what I mean? Because you're just so sick and you don't want any device, and you're just so sick of all the fucking, all the flaws, all the exploits that come out every day, and you get done with it. So, but let's get it, the question here is what operating system to use. We haven't, it's a specific question. They ask the specifics between two operating systems, and we'll get into them. But even one of these has recently had a horrible fucking exploit against it. And, oh man. Anyway, this got DM'd to me on Twitter, and it is, do you think OpenBSD is a more secure operating system than Qubes? Of course, QubesOS, right? This is a very popular now, thankfully, and frankly popular due to Edward Snowden. But this is it's Linux-based. It's not BSD. And of course, BSD and Linux are not the same thing, even though they share, one could argue, very similar code bases. And one certainly sprung out of the other in a very real way, but it wasn't exactly a fork. Not I don't think in the technical terms you would use that. But anyway, QubesOS is a Linux operating system that effectively, thanks to, any computer that can really do virtualization with the processor, it's able to take advantage of that process to where not just the operating system, but every single app within the operating system works within a sandbox. Okay. And, works almost like every app is its own operating system. It's a very clever idea. It's a very well done idea. OpenBSD, on the other hand, which I have said throughout the entirety of Sovereign Tech's run, so almost 10 years, and I said it long before, OpenBSD is my favorite operating system. It is my go-to. It is what, if I were setting up a business, or if I was setting up, whatever, some kind of workstation situation, the heart of that would be OpenBSD, no matter what. Just a fact of life. Okay. But OpenBSD recently had a really, really nasty authentication exploit. And to make matters worse, okay, and we're talking in November that this was discovered. Okay, now it's earlier this month in December. Now it's already been patched. Okay, and if you are somebody using OpenBSD, it's a pretty good bet you already heard about it. But do look into how to update if you're using 6.5 or 6.6. This has already been patched. But the irony was, and I hate this, okay, is that it used basically a local privilege escalation through XLock. Okay, now XLock is what handles passwords, all this different stuff. But not only that, it's all authentication. So that includes YubiKeys and S keys, right? So what could happen here is that once they gained access basically to the auth user group, okay, on an OpenBSD system, they would then get secondary they'd escalate to secondary root access to where they would get access to the protocol that takes advantage of YubiKeys. And then they could just make up whatever key they wanted at that stage. And the operating system would say, oh, okay, yeah, come on in. So you didn't even have to have the right YubiKey. And oh man, I mean that's let's just call it, that's a pain in the dick. Like that sucks. Like that hit me twice because it's like, oh man, they found an exploit in OpenBSD in the OS system, but then it was taking advantage of what was set up in OpenBSD to allow for the use of YubiKeys. And you know how much I support the use of YubiKeys, and I was like, oh motherfucker. I mean, that's bad. You know, now granted, as I understand, I mean, it's not, you had to be local, right? You know, it had to be evil Maid, more or less. Actually, we're going to get into that in a second, okay? It's not something that, that can be done remotely. And that's good, but shit, that sucked. Qubes has not really run into those kinds of situations so often. Of course, OpenBSD has a tremendous history of being really rock solid, as long as you don't go once you start adding in third-party software, then some bets, not all, but then some bets are off. I will still stand by, despite that situation, which got patched pretty much immediately. Despite that situation, I still stand by OpenBSD as being the more secure of the two. And part of the reason that I say that, now, I mean, I guess, okay, let me caveat this, because if you're going to add in a bunch of apps and software, and I totally understand why you would, it's a fucking computer, right? Qubes will handle third-party software in a much more secure way than, say, OpenBSD would. But OpenBSD now comes with so many things pre-installed, and also you no longer have the issue, you don't need the Linux compatibility layer anymore within OpenBSD. A lot of those third-party concerns have really been resolved. So it's still kind of why I'm standing by OpenBSD, but I could see where, in a very simplified argument, where you could say that QubesOS is actually the more secure if you're going to install a bunch of different, software into it. Because at that stage, yeah, QubesOS does a better job of like third-party software security. But just by its nature, by what it is, by the sandboxing and all this. So that's what I would say to that. But out of the box, I still think OpenBSD is the more solid. Also, OpenBSD has a much broader hardware set that it can work with, okay? As to where QubesOS it's not really limited. I mean, if you're using any computer from the past 10 years, QubesOS is probably going to do just fine for you. But OpenBSD, again, it's compatible with more hardware configurations. So in a way, it comes down to, personal taste and tolerance and hardware as well. What you want to run that with. QubesOS is certainly a lot easier to install it's easier to install. Again, like I said, OpenBSD can run on more hardware, technically, but, the install process for OpenBSD is not the simplest thing on planet Earth, even though it has dramatically improved over the years. As to where QubesOS is something that just about anybody, I think, could install. I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions that it's going to ask you that you might not know exactly how to answer, but by and large, QubesOS, I mean, and part of this is because QubesOS is partly developed with, activists and other people in mind in that sense, that really need this ease of use, very hardened security. But if you know what you're doing, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the iOS and Android debate, where people say, well, out of the box, iOS is much more secure, and it's security that everybody else can do. But Android, if you know what you're doing, can be far more secure than iOS. And I think it's kind of a similar argument here. I think OpenBSD overall can be more secure, but you got to know what you're doing. As to where QubesOS can be a lot easier for a lot of people to end up installing. In fact, I went to a meetup. Oh boy, well, I guess this is about 2 years ago now, at least. But I went to a meetup where people were being shown how to install QubesOS. And you could do that. As to where if you went to a meetup and you brought in layman people and you tried to show them how to install, OpenBSD, grab a lounge chair because it's going to be a while. And even then, it's a debate whether or not, people would get it up and running. So, there's two ways you can go with that. And I mean, I think you can kind of say both are the most secure depending upon who's using it, right? I think that kind of argument could get made. But I would personally say I think OpenBSD is still the king, is still, the top of the heap as far as most secure operating systems out there. And learning BSD in general is a very good thing. And I think that in the future, knowing BSD more so than even Linux could be very useful. How about I put it that way? But I would have to go into rampant speculations and possibilities as to why knowing BSD would be so important. And I mean, you can rock FreeBSD as well. There's a lot more documentation, and FreeBSD has a lot more, is a lot easier to install and has a lot more hardware configurations that it can work with, even than, especially like without a lot of complex setup, than OpenBSD does. And interestingly, too, there has been a major push for gaming to become a thing with OpenBSD, which I don't know what is exactly surrounding that. I don't know how that ends up becoming a thing. I mean, I've gotten, like a ZDoom, right? I've gotten ZDoom to work on, or GZDoom, sorry. I've gotten GZDoom to work on an OpenBSD machine. So you can play Doom, you can play Sigil, right? You can play some of that stuff, or Chex Wars. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised by this new push where there are a lot of people who are very, very interested in OpenBSD being used as some kind of gaming machine. That's a little weird. I don't think that's ever really going to happen. And in fact, I would like NVIDIA's clause to never be involved with OpenBSD, but that's a thing that's happening out there. So, all right. Now, this next question is one I really like. And I have two more beyond this, but they kind of play into each other. In fact, they have to do with MaidSafe as well as cryptocurrencies in general. And I think I'll save those for next week, for the next Q&A. But this one plays into, I think, it does play into those, but it also plays off of what we were just describing, as in, what's the most secure operating system to use, etc. And I think there kind of might be a third answer here, as far as like what's the most secure operating system to really use. And we'll get into this and we'll talk about it. But here's the question. Can we speculate on what Steve Gibson, of course, Steve Gibson of the Security Now podcast and my personal hero, does to protect his computers when he leaves his house? Are there other, more practical ways to protect the physical security of your equipment against evil Maid-like attacks? Now, an evil Maid attack, folks, is basically, the concept is that, somebody could, if they were in your hotel room, okay, if you were at your hotel room, you left your laptop in your hotel room, and the maid came in to clean something, and she did something like put a keylogger or did something physical, the USB device, whatever, to your laptop while you were away and you didn't know. Okay, so that's the basic idea behind an evil Maid attack. Of course, it doesn't require a hotel room or an actual maid. Could be anybody that does that kind of action, right? It's a local attack that happens right there against your devices. That's the idea. But anyway, let's keep going here. Haven app doesn't work great in homes shared between multiple people. Yeah. Haven is a cool idea. Of course, the Haven app is another thing that was actually promoted by Edward Snowden, where you take your old Android phones and you use them as basically as security cameras that can get access through the Haven app on, say, while you're away. But yeah, that runs into issues where, you might not be in complete control of the home. You might have roommates. I mean, all these kinds of things that could end up being an issue. And, having like roommates or, multi-people living situations, I mean, that's becoming more common by the day, right? As the economy tanks, and it is, as the economy, shits the bed, or even if you just want to save money. The economy doesn't even have to be shit if you just want to save money. Living with more than one, having multiple people in your home can be a very practical, thing to do. I completely understand that. So, that way instead of your monthly rent being, I don't know, $2,000, it's only $400 or $500 or something. I mean, that's great, right? Sure. So wanting to physically, protect the physical security of your equipment at home is a very valid, very real thing that needs to be talked about. Now, I'm going to slightly sidestep this. I've kind of gotten this question before, and I will get to actual things that everybody can do. Okay, so the reason he brought up Steve Gibson, I'm guessing, is because, so I saw Steve Gibson at the Unlocked event a couple months back in Boston. And there I was shocked, and I think a lot of people were, so Steve Gibson doesn't leave his home very often, or at least not for extended periods of time. But Squirrel has been released. We're going to end up talking about that. I'm actually taking advantage of Squirrel right now. I am implementing it into a website. Squirrel, his authentication method, Squirrel, has been unleashed upon the world. Okay, a very exciting thing. But he was basically doing a little bit of a world tour of showing people and giving demonstrations of Squirrel. And one of these events where he talked about it was at the Unlocked event. Okay, that LastPass was holding in Boston. It was a great event. I talked about it already on Sovereign Tech Prime as well as on Underground episodes. So, but when he was there, he said, and again, this shocked me, and like I said, a lot of other people, I think, but he says, yeah, when I left my home to do this little tour, none of my computers are at the house. Whoa, right? And he kind of speaks at when I got a question like this long before, this is a couple of years ago, when I got a similar question to this, it speaks to my answer that I had at the time when somebody was asking the same thing. In fact, I think the person was moving, and so they were wondering, hey, when I have like people coming in for an open house and I'm trying to sell my home, I don't want to pull out all my equipment because I'm still living there, but when people come in to look at it, I want to make sure this shit's secure. What do I do? It was a great question. And my answer that I'm about to give you does not really speak to that or it doesn't entirely speak to that. But anyway, let's get into it. I think Steve Gibson's solution is a great one, right? Is store, when you're going to be away for extended periods of time, store your shit somewhere else. But we can't all do that. Now, here's the thing, and it's funny because I think for a lot of people, this is going to sound like cloud computing. It is and it isn't, okay? The most secure thing you can do, in my opinion, and actually this ironically kind of speaks to Chromebooks as well, okay? If for whatever reason, if you can't have all your shit stored on a laptop that you can just pick up and take and go, okay, and that is your one computer to rule them all, and that's where, all your data sits, even though you should have external hard drives that back up all your stuff, right? And maybe even make images of your OS and whatever else, okay? Those are all good things to do. But if you can't just have one computer and you need either multiple computers or you, for whatever reason, need to have remote access to your data, for reasons as simple as maybe, like we've talked about recently, perhaps you're still doing a Plex server, or you just need access. You want your photos backed up somewhere and not to Google, or you want access to your music wherever you go without having to carry your laptop around. And in fact, you can't even play your music because if you're carrying your laptop around, it's shut off, and that's your Plex server, and you're fucked, right? I mean, there's so many scenarios here where you could want this. So let me lay this on you. And then again, we will talk about what you could do with the actual equipment that you might have at the house. So a great thing to have is, as I've said often on the show, is have a NAS. Okay, fine. We live in a world where you're on the go, but you also, and you need remote access to your data, but at the same time, you don't want that remote access be access to Google or Microsoft or whoever, with either Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox or you name it. So a great, I don't want to say it's middle of the road, but a great thing to get people used to is to having their own cloud, right? Like a NAS, network area storage. This is a very important thing, I think, to get people on board with, okay? Because it allows them to be mobile, allows them to access data remotely like they're used to, but then at the same time, now this isn't my complete answer, but I'm getting to it. But then at the same time, it's not giving everything to whatever, asshat company who will gladly hand it all over to pick your authoritarian alphabet soup organization. Okay? So having a NAS is kind of step one here, right? And having the data be stored on something that doesn't have as simple of attack vectors as a full-on computer does is a very great and wonderful thing. Okay, like there's no real keylogger necessarily. I mean, yes, this can be done, but there's not really so much a keylogger or other things to do to a NAS. Okay, when they like the person, the potential attacker can't see your there's no screen attached to it, right? So that's a very good thing. I mean, there's a lot of options. Just having a NAS alone eliminates a lot of appeal to the device. They're also a lot easier to hide. That's certainly a part of it. But basically, having all of your data in this, I mean, when you're running a NAS, you can encrypt those drives, right? And you can do great encryption because you're not so much worried about the speed required by an operating system or by a local operating system, maybe where you need to do some gaming or something like that. But get everything onto a NAS. Okay, all the important stuff that you're worried about, getting taken away from you, whatever, get it onto a NAS. And you could say, well, somebody could just end up stealing the NAS. I mean, if the concern is that somebody will just literally pick up and walk away with your device, or say with the NAS, I mean, then that's a concern with any device, and you would have to do what Steve Gibson says, and that is lock the shit away somewhere else. Now, but I want to go a little bit further than just using a NAS. I really wish, and I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, how is this different than Google or Microsoft? Okay. This is the idea that I posited in the past when I got asked this question. I really wish that there were, for lack of a better phrase, some kind of safe house, some kind of safe houses where you could go set up your own servers, right? And basically Steve Gibson has this with, I think he calls it Level 3 is the name of the company that allows for it. But places where, like independent server farms, effectively. I mean, it'd be great if we could get to the point where, we don't need servers anymore. Okay, like say Maid safe, but we got to talk about that in the next episode, okay, before we go there. But as far as like the here and now, right now, what you can do and what you can actually purchase practically, okay, it'd be awesome if there was just a place where you could go plug in your NAS. It was locked down safely, right? A place that had its own security and everything. This way you weren't worried about other people looking to, being able to even touch your stuff, okay? And the only people that would have access to it would be, like the proprietors of this little server farm, this independent server farm. Okay, it'd be awesome if there was a place that I could go to where you get access to via key. You could get access to your NAS, and it had a great internet connection, and you rented it for, I don't know, $10 a month or something like that, and your stuff was there. It was under the watchful eye of somebody who has the incentive of doing business, right, and protecting your shit and not having a reputation of letting people get access to your stuff, whatever. I mean, that would solve so many problems if we could have that. But here's the rub. It's got to be local. Okay, this is where it's not Google or Microsoft. Okay, because you have to trust some big centralized authority. As to where in this case, it would be buildings that are kind of all over the place. These independent farms, data farm or, server farms if you want to, or NAS farms if you want to call it that. It'd be someplace local where you could really know the person. Hell, you could see them when you go grocery shopping or whatever, that it would be that small of a deal, or it'd be run by other activists, right? But it's got to be small time. It is not something, I mean, and when it is something that is small time, then it's not you trusting Microsoft or Google with your data and making wide access of it. Okay, you're running your own cloud and it's encrypted and you're doing all the right stuff with that anyway. But it's being handled at a very small company, but you still get to drive to it and physically access it, because you can't do that with Google or Microsoft, right? Like you can't drive up to Google and say, "Hey, could you take me? I'd like to see my server where my Google Drive storage is located, please." You can't do that. But you want to be able to do that. And so that'd be awesome if somebody ran these kinds of businesses. I know they're kind of out there, but there needs to be a lot more of them. And I think somebody could really, if there's an activist somewhere, they could make a pretty good mint if they rented out part of like their home or something. And you could say, well, that'd be a hot target for the FBI and whatever else. I mean, if that's the situation, we have all kinds of other concerns to have as well. Okay. But if it's just a place where you have access to, your MP3s, your movies, whatever else, I mean, like none of that should really be a concern. So anyway, that kind of thing needs to become a thing somewhere, somehow, some way, and I mean, there'd be a lot of, legal mumbo jumbo that would have to go down that, hey, yeah, I'm going to protect your NAS to the best of my ability, but, shit can happen and I'm not held liable. And, I mean, like the proprietor would have to would probably engage in a lot of legal protections. And I understand that and it's there, but that's an idea. That's one thing. It's a shame, frankly. Speaking away from that idea, again, we're going to get into some practical things you can do here in a second. It's a shame that smartphones are such security and privacy nightmares. Because wouldn't it be so beautiful if we could just carry our stuff with us wherever we go, right? In a little pocketable device. Then there's no reason to leave it anywhere other than having, and there's no really good reason. Because, I mean, we already know the multitude of terabytes that can get stored on micro SD cards, even if they haven't gone to market yet. We know it's possible. You could store every song you could ever fucking want. And most of the movies and whatever else, I mean, probably on something the size of a smartphone, especially if you could hold multiple micro SD cards. You could make a device where everything that you want access to remotely could end up being on that little portable device. And go with something like a Ubuntu phone or like what was the Windows 10 technology? Fuck, it really was exciting at the time. Not crossover, it's something like that. Where you would plug in a Windows 10 mobile, which is dead, but you could plug in one of those phones into a dock and then it would turn into a computer and it would display, you'd have keyboard and mouse and it would, be on a giant display and everything, and it would work effectively like Windows 10. Effectively, not really, but more or less. That was such a cool, those kinds of ideas. Ubuntu phone was going to do the same thing. Samsung kind of does it with Galaxy phones with their DeX platform. That wouldn't it be great if we could just access things that way, But you can't. So how do you protect the devices? I'm just saying it's a shame that again, the privacy and security issues are there, because if we had privacy respecting and security hardened mobile devices, that would solve a lot of this, quite frankly. But we're not there, okay? And we're probably never going to be there, because if you actually did those devices right, they would cost even more than what the exorbitant prices that people already pay for smartphones. So it's not going to happen. But regardless of that, okay? So what can you do? Say you have your laptops or your desktops or maybe even your NAS. This could be done with all of them, because the point of concern is usually the USB ports, right? Like this is where an evil Maid attack becomes the reality, is with USB ports. Tamper-proof tape, there's that great picture that we talked about years ago where I don't know how many subscribers ended up coming onto Instagram, and Mark Zuckerberg celebrated with a picture of himself holding up an Instagram frame or whatever. It's a stupid-ass idea and picture, but the picture itself was very telling, because we got to look at Mark Zuckerberg's MacBook. And he had tape over the cameras. He had tape over the USB ports. We saw what software he was using. He was using Thunderbird for his email, so he was probably using PGP. It was a very, very interesting picture. that we did a full breakdown of years ago. And it was funny because, when all that stuff that Mark Zuckerberg had done to his computer 10 years ago would have gotten you labeled, a paranoid schizophrenic or some kind of like nut job or whatever. I mean, they would have thought you were crazy doing all that stuff. Oh no, now billion-dollar CEOs are doing it. Okay, it's because it works. But so, I mean, taping over USB ports, that's certainly something that one can do as far as like preventing evil Maid attacks. Having a laptop, and not having an actual desktop where you plug in a keyboard, that's a helpful thing, because the more ports you have, basically, the more trouble you're going to get into. Okay, and you got to grasp that. And so wherever a USB keyboard plugs into, or a keyboard, if it's PS2, whatever keyboard plugs into, you're going to run into problems with that. Again, this is, and I guess I could have asked the person some more questions, because knowing what your situation is and what you need, what you want to do mobily or, while on the go, is kind of important here, because it's easy enough to say, well, buy a little 11-inch cheap ass, I don't know, Lenovo or HP or something, and have that act as mainly, or even a Raspberry Pi, and have it act as your server more or less while you're at home, and if you're going away for extended periods of time, pack that thing away, and shove it away in a backpack, because it's so small and it's all in one, that can be a very, very handy way of really going about that. But really, you're left with, using tape, right, over ports. Tamper-proof tape, understand this, if it's serious enough and if a person's knowledgeable enough, tamper-proof tape can be beaten by simply using a heat gun or a blow dryer. Okay, because that'll keep the tape from separating where it's supposed to separate and say void, right, when you pull it off. You can get past that with a heat gun. All right, a lot of people don't really know that, but tamper-proof tape isn't like that. It's good, but it's not foolproof. It's not perfect. Okay. So you have that concern, to worry about. I don't think setting up cameras is that great of an idea for within a home. I'll tell you, and maybe I should look into this, but the concept around Alexa Guard, okay, is actually a pretty good one. The idea of just having a microphone that is listening, okay, for something to happen, some kind of sound, right? That is a far more, as long as it doesn't get sent off, to Amazon, and if it was merely something that occurred locally, or that went directly, perhaps, somehow the alert that it would go off if somebody was, touching your devices or entered your room or something like this. If the alert that went off was somehow, encrypted and just sent to you, and it wasn't like the sound data wasn't being recorded, because really the only thing that has to get sent over the internet to you, if you're away, that something's going on in your room, or is happening to your device, all you need is the alert. You don't need the audio. Okay. So if there was, and there's probably something out there that exists like this. But if you had an app, like if you could just, I don't know, lay down a smartphone or something like that was just listening near your devices and would know if somebody was nearby them, or was like, there's no real quiet way to put in a USB device, right? Like that's going to make noise no matter what. And if you were just had something that was set to locally listen for that and then remotely send an alert, again, the only thing that has to go out is the alert. Then maybe it could activate. You could get interesting with this, and maybe you could activate where you could hear what was going on there. And maybe you could even speak out of the speaker of this thing at that point. Okay. But again, none of that would activate unless the alert was hit. I would still personally feel better if it just sent an alert, and then I would know when I got home to look around and see if something happened, and check various things within, say, the operating system of my, computer that might have been touched or something along those lines. I mean, though, like that's where things I think get a little more interesting. But that doesn't actually, it might exist. I'm going to look into it now that I think about it. But that could be a more interesting way to go. I mean, don't buy an Alexa to do this. But the concept behind Alexa Guard, where if you have the Alexa in your room and you tell it to, listen for loud noises or problems, I mean, it's a pretty good concept. It's just we don't want that data getting recorded. We don't want that stuff getting recorded, and we don't want it going off to Amazon, right? So something along those lines could be very interesting. You probably can't really hide your equipment, and again, maybe you need it even powered up. I mean, most people I don't think are going to know what to do with tamper-proof tape. There's no really great way to lock stuff down. I mean, if you wanted to, you could literally, fasten shit down and screw it into the floor or whatever. A lot of this depends on what your situation is. Okay. And how, how to keep it from happening. But I really feel, so, there's some possibilities that I just laid out there. Okay. Again, tamper-proof tape it's not perfect, but it's a fairly good bet. Okay. But one of the best things that could really happen is if we did have places like storage buildings or whatever, where we could, rent out, access, and rent out basically plugging in a NAS at a separate location than our homes. But a place that we can go and look at the NAS, inspect it, work on it, whatever, and we have access to it, and where we have, and because it's our NAS, we have control of, the encryption within it and everything. So those are the directions that I think that we can go. There's not a lot of practical solutions for evil Maid attacks other than really taking the devices with you. I mean, I think that if there was more that could be done that made a lot of sense, Steve Gibson wouldn't have taken all of his computers out of his house and left them elsewhere. Right? So, I mean, it kind of points at that there aren't a lot of great options as far as this goes. I think setting up some kind of sonic alert, would be really that'd be great. And there's got to be apps like that fucking exist. I'll look into it, and if I find something, I'm probably going to talk about it on a Sovereign Tech proper, because I think people, everybody should fucking implement it. But again, it doesn't need to be something where all of the voice data is going off to Amazon, right? So, all right, let's move on from that. Great question. I love thinking about these sorts of things, and for lack of a better term, wargaming, these kinds of concepts. I mean, we'll get into it maybe in the next episode when I get to this person's other two questions. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't mind a world where everything went sneaker net anyway, but I don't know if we're ever going to get there. Certainly not on a large scale. We never would. But let's get into our album of the week, and then we'll wrap this baby up. The album of the week is, frankly, a shitty one, and it's a shame. I don't like saying that it's a shitty album for a lot of reasons here, because I'm actually a big fan of this band. The band is Quiet Riot. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, they're still around? Yes. As often when I bring up an album of the week, I know I get that response from people whoa, those people still make albums? Yeah, most people that actually had musical talent in the 80s are genuinely talented, and they don't fade out artists today who disappear after a song or something. So they keep going because they just have that whatever allowed for that talent to come to fruition. But that's another conversation for another time. Anyway, they came out with their 14th studio album. Can you believe that? Their 14th studio album this year. It came out November 8th. So last month, this came out November 8th, 2019. It's kind of a weird deal because the singer on this album, so you got to understand, Kevin DuBrow died years ago, who's the original singer for Quiet Riot that everybody knows. He died. Sad. He had a tragic life, no doubt. But anyway, he died. Quiet Riot has had a string of singers. Kevin DuBrow even wasn't always with Quiet Riot when he was alive. They brought in other singers, for the album Quiet Riot, which was, they're self-titled. That it's kind of their fourth album, kind of. Quiet Quiet Riot's history is so kludgy. I mean, most people didn't know they were a thing until Mental Health, right? And then they did Condition Critical, then they did QR3, but QR3 was kind of technically their fifth album because they actually had at least two albums before Mental Health. So you see how confusing their history is. Anyway, this new album, Hollywood Cowboys, okay, I mean, it's bad. And it's not like Quiet Riot stopped making great music after maybe Condition Critical or QR3, right? Some of their later albums, in fact, my favorite album by them isn't even one of their ones from the 80s. My favorite album from them came out, I think, in 99, and it was Alive and Well. That has The Ritual, it has a ton of badass songs on there. I love that album to death. And its follow-up was not as good, but it kind of felt in the same vein, that being Guilty Pleasures. You know, I kind of dug that, but point being, they have continuously come out with albums. I had the pleasure of seeing Quiet Riot with Kevin DuBrow playing. With Kevin DuBrow singing. That was really cool. Basically, the only original member now of Quiet Riot is the drummer, Frankie Banali. Now, the sad part is, and part of the reason I don't like saying that this album is shit, is because Frankie Banali found out recently, or he was recently diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He's still alive right now, but who knows how long that's going to be. I mean, he's changed his diet, and that's given him quite a bit of a new lease on life. Like he's a vegan now, I believe. And that has dramatically shifted how the cancer was affecting him, which, I mean, great. But regardless, he has that. And we, you don't know how long. I mean, he's still touring, amazingly. But, you don't know how long that's going to go for. And this could be Quiet Riot's last album, at least with one of the original members. And that's really sad. And I don't want this to be their swan song, or it's not their swan song. I don't want it to be their last album. But it's called Hollywood Cowboys. It has their singer, the singer that they had replaced back in 2017, that being James Durbin. Originally, before that, they had Jizzy Pearl doing vocals, really ever since Kevin DuBrow died. And Jizzy Pearl does a good job. And they had was it Rehab? Or no, wait. I think Rehab had Kevin DuBrow. They've 10, I think it was the album 10. I actually like that album. And Jizzy Pearl was doing lead vocals on that. But before this album even ended up coming out, Jizzy Pearl, or James Durbin, was fired from the band, or I think he was fired. And Jizzy Pearl came back in as lead singer. And that's a shame because Jizzy Pearl has a much better voice than James Durbin. And I think maybe if Jizzy was singing on some of these songs, maybe some of these songs would have had a little extra oomph to them. But overall, it just felt like a very weak album. I was not impressed at all. I can't recommend listening to it. I'm mentioning it that it's out there. Maybe you will like it if you're I don't think many people could be bigger fans of Quiet Riot than I am right now. But if somehow you're a harder core Quiet Riot fan than I am, and I'm not saying I don't like Quiet Riot like I like Kiss. I'm just saying by comparison, there aren't a lot of fans for this band anymore and most people who even would like Quiet Riot probably can't even name a recent album or sing a recent song off of anything other than, between Mental Health, Condition Critical, and QR3. It's where I can do that in spades. Okay, not sing it, at least not well. Maybe better than Kevin. No, I'm not going to insult the guy. I think Kevin DuBrow had a very unique, interesting voice. But if someone is a harder core Quiet Riot fan than I am, and I'm sure there's people out there who are that, I wouldn't have believed that until I saw all of the fans of was it Stradivarius or whatever, or no, Sonata Arctica, not Stradivarius, Sonata Arctica. I cannot believe that there are hardcore fans of that band, but there are. So maybe there are really hardcore fans of Quiet Riot out there, and maybe you love this album, though you probably don't need me to tell you that it came out if you're a bigger fan than me. So maybe you'll love it. And if you do, great, let Frankie Banali know somehow, because he is not long for this world. It's a pretty good bet, and that's a shame. So, but anyway, Hollywood Cowboys, give it a listen if you want to give it a shot. If you didn't know Quiet Riot was still around. Again, it's a shame because they've had some really great later albums. I thought Quiet Riot 10, I liked it. I liked it a lot. That came out in 2014. They had Road Rage after that, which wasn't like a really strong album. It was certainly better than Hollywood Cowboys, but regardless, but yeah, when you get into like Alive and Well, that I thought that was fantastic. QR, of course, that's from '88. I think that's a very strong album, even though that doesn't have Kevin DuBrow. There's a lot to explore of Quiet Riot outside of, those big 3 albums. And again, there's even 2 that came out before. I think they only came out in Japan, though. That being Quiet Riot and Quiet Riot 2 in the 70s, that most people don't even know were there. But whatever. Maybe this will inspire you to check out the band's history overall. You're going to find plenty of duds. Like in 95, they had that album Down to the Bone. Not good. Not good. But so you're going to find some duds. But then you're also going to find some real gems in Quiet Riot's history. Again, even outside of their big 3 albums from the 80s. So there you go. Check that out. If you don't want to, don't check out Hollywood Cowboys. Maybe just go listen to Alive and Well. It's a fucking awesome album. Or go listen to Quiet Riot 10. I really enjoyed that album a lot when it came out. In fact, I think I even covered that for an Album of the Week. And that was when Album of the Week was actually part of Sovereign Tech proper and not just on, not just in the underground. So I'll leave you with that and a lot to think about from this episode. Maybe you're going to secure your shit, install a new operating system, do some interesting things at home to keep other people from accessing your kit. And, maybe you're going to go out and buy a Star Wars book too. Who knows? So anyway, we'll wrap this one up. I will see all of you on the other side.